Welcome to Coffee and Keys, where we blend our expertise and personal experiences to unlock your awareness of the real estate industry.
They're the best.
Here they are.
And now, here's your hosts, Darlene Kemp and Crystal Jacques.
Hey, Darlene. Welcome back.
Welcome back.
We both have been out and about and selling homes and helping people with mortgages. And guess what? We circled back with a guest. We found a guest.
I'm excited.
So let me introduce our guest, who is an expert in something I am not. So let's introduce Don Hines. He is a commercial real estate agent from Coldwell Banker in Seattle. We went all the way to Seattle. To find him.
Welcome aboard,
Don.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm not sure I'm an expert on anything, but I'll let you know what I think.
Listen, if you know more about this than I do, you're an expert.
Okay. Well,
So we really just thought it would be, absolutely. We just thought it would be a neat little topic to go, because we've been talking about residential, real estate and financing, to kind of show what some of the differences in real estate are from residential to commercial. So we've got some questions lined up for you today. So hopefully we can get some basics out of the way and get some information out there to buyers that might be interested in commercial as well as residential real estate.
All right.
Definitely, because that's a topic we've kind of grazed it a little, but we never could go far into it because, as we all know, I'm a residential real estate agent. So here we go.
Okay.
So Don, I'm going to lay out these questions and then we'll circle back around and answer each one.
Okay.
Okay, so what is the difference between residential and commercial real estate? What is commercial real estate? And what are the different types of commercial real estate?
Okay.
And then here's a third question. How is it priced? How do you price it? Because we all know in residential real estate, it's the seller that decides how much they want for their house, and that is the price, and you negotiate from there. Excuse me. So that's another question for you. And how is commercial real estate financed?
Okay.
Okay.
And what's the difference between?
All good questions.
All right. Well, I would define commercial real estate primarily as investment properties. And the different categories would be retail, office, multifamily, and warehouse, I would say. I can't remember the next question in order, actually.
No. Let's stop right there. Because
talk about it a little bit.
Everybody, if anybody knows about commercial real estate, they do know the retail side. It's when you walk into a mall or a mall, a building, and it's got these stores in it. So that's basically what I know, except for the test. It touches when you take these real estate tests. It touches a little bit on it, but that's basically what we know. So there's different types of commercial real estate. Let's focus on the different types because, like I said, everybody knows the building, but what other types are there that we can discuss?
Well, there's multifamily, which, big apartment buildings, things over 4 units. There's the office space, which is really not doing well right now. There's retail, and then there's industrial. And most all of those are, unless it's a user building, which doesn't happen that often, they're priced based on how much money they make. And most of the pricing gets done by using a cap rate, capitalization rate. So that's the rate of return you get on your investment. So if you bought something for $1,000 and it made $70 a year, you'd have a 7 cap. So cap rates go up and down. They're up right now, which means the price of the buildings go down. They're up. They usually follow interest rates. When rates go up, property values go down because it's an expense the owner has to run the building.
So the cap rate, is that like you're saying, what is it, a return on?
the rate of return on your investment. So it's based on really if you paid cash for a building, that would be your true return. If you have a loan on it, what makes more sense is a cash on cash return. So if you put a $500,000 into the building and you were making a 5% or a 7% return on that amount of money, that actually makes more sense to me for most people, because most buildings are financed.
So just kind of take a little bit of step back. So on a residential, we think residential real estate, that's where somebody is going to go, live into the property. So they really don't think about value as far as rate of return on your investment, right? We all know that real estate is a great investment because over time it usually appreciates in value and you can kind of gain that back. But when you buy residential real estate, you buy it to live in it. So it's not just about the investment so what I'm hearing you say is on the commercial end is really commercial real estate is anything that kind of it's a business, right? So you're doing it to make money. So commercial is more on the business end, where residential is more on the personal end.
Right.
So, I know we deal a lot in residential real estate, which is either a single family, condo, townhouse, or it can even be, multi-units, which would be a duplex, so anywhere from 4 units and under we can do as a residential. Right. So commercial, you're saying is either like apartment buildings where there are more than 4 units or an office or industrial, but the main purpose of that residential or of that real estate is the income that it can produce. So it's more like business. Commercial is business financing.
And that's
so how fast or how slow do you want that rate of return? Because I know in residential, a year or more, it takes to kind of start seeing your income or your equity in your house. So on commercial, how fast do you want to turn it?
Well, that's kind of a different story on how fast you're going to turn it. That's more of the appreciation part. If you're talking cap rates or cash on cash return, that would be what would happen as soon as you own the building.
Right. The income that it produces, like if it's an office building that you pay rent, right? How much is the rent that you're going to get for rent, then to offset the expenses?
And that's also the primary thing that a lender looks at when they loan on the building. They usually water it down a little bit, like they'll allow maybe between 70-75% of the income off the building to qualify for the loan.
Oh, so the buyer's got to bring like 25% down, usually, approximately.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well,
so a little higher.
Yeah, you can't. There aren't any like 5% downs on commercial. It's usually the least I've ever seen is 20%. But that's how a lender looks at financing the building. It's more about the building and the income and the leases than it is about the individual. The thing about the individual that they want to know that they have some experience managing a building usually.
Right. So anytime we talk about lending, we usually talk about risk. The higher the risk, the higher the rate, right? So I think on the residential end, if somebody's going to live in that property as their primary property, that's like the last loan that they'll default on, right? Because they're living in it. They need a roof over their head. Right. So a lot of times and then you have that house is used as collateral for that loan. So we can get in, the government loans, VA loans, 0 money down, USDA, 0 money down, FHA 3.5%. You can get some conventionals as low as 3% down. But when you're talking about commercial, obviously the higher risk, higher the rate, right?
Correct.
And then higher the risk, the higher the down payment requirement for that one. So they consider the commercial real estate to be a little bit riskier than residential. So therefore you've got a little bit more money out of pocket and usually higher interest rates, right?
Want the big down payment or a bigger down payment.
Right. Wow. So that kind of makes makes sense. Now in the residential, we can do 1 to 4 units, so you can have somebody come in with little money down. As long as they're going to occupy one of those units, they can still do it as a primary property and have rent income from the duplex, or you can go up to 4 units on that one. But then after that, it's considered commercial real estate. So if it's more than 4 units, commercial real estate,
Right.
and where you have the income coming in from the other units. And then, you don't have to own or occupy that one either. It's all basically, it's a business. So the commercial is really there for an investment, right?
That's the
So
primary
what's the most
reason to buy it.
popular? Yeah. What's the most popular type of commercial real estate?
I'd say the lowest risk is probably industrial right now. The thing that people like the least would be office. Office is going to have some trouble.
Especially after the pandemic, where everybody stopped going into the office and started working from home.
Right.
Sure,
and
that had a
smaller
huge
buildings, I
effect on
think, are
commercial.
safer than the bigger ones. The kinds that can be owner user. That's treated a little more like residential, where if you have a restaurant or something and you want to own your own building, you might sell that property at a premium because of that. Especially the really small ones, the ones that are less than 3,000 square feet.
Wow.
Something that we're seeing a lot more in this area than we're used to seeing is what we call the mixed use properties.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see them now where they have the commercial properties on the lower level for like coffee shops or things like that. And then they have apartments or condos above them. So we've got what we call our town center here that they started doing a lot of those mixed use. And we've actually seen them in different places where they put the apartments above them and the mixed use residential or the commercial spaces below them. So we're seeing a lot of
mixed
those
use has
nowadays.
been around a long time. Most of the older cities have retail on the sidewalk level and then apartments upstairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do those do well? I know they look pretty cool.
Yeah. No,
I mean, I would be in trouble if I lived above a restaurant that had really good food. I would be in so much trouble.
especially for Palm Park, right?
Exactly. They have pecan pie or a bakery.
Oh, you get trouble.
Yeah, we'd all have to.
So do they do well?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, It's a funny time right now, I think, in the world, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's really just about culture and what people are kind of looking for. I think nowadays, some of the younger generations, they're staying at home a lot longer than they ever used to.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And then when they do get out, they really don't want the whole responsibility of a yard and a house and all that yet. So sometimes these mixed use are just the next step to go, because then they don't have to worry about the drive, and hopefully they're close to where they work, and everything can be done in those small little communities. So that's kind of neat.
Well, small units that are really walkable do well, especially with young people, because a lot of them don't even have cars. They Uber or walk wherever they go, which makes a lot of sense.
Oh yeah. It's kind of cheaper, isn't it?
It's probably way cheaper
than buying a car.
Yeah.
Wow. So how do they price mixed use? Do they price it as residential, or do they price it as commercial? Or
Well, you still price it based on the income.
Do you buy them?
It would be based on the income. Yeah. So it would be, if things in a certain area are selling between say a 5 and a 6 cap, you'd probably price it somewhere in there. You mentioned earlier that residential, the owners price the buildings. That happens a lot in commercial too. Because there's a personality. There's a personality behind every property, and it just depends on what their willingness to look at what's reasonable and what they want. I mean, everybody's had a seller.
We always say, what is... Yeah.
Everybody's had a seller that wants more than the property's worth, whether it's residential or...
Yeah. And we always say that the value of the property is really what somebody's willing to pay for it, right?
That is true.
that's your
that's
value.
absolutely true.
So, and so the kind of the difference on residential, when we go to appraise a property, they're looking at other homes that are similar to that, so that they're looking at apples to apples, and this is what they sold for. Therefore, this one would most likely sell for that. But from what I'm hearing, you're saying more on the commercial end, it's not what it would actually sell for or other like properties. It's what is the income that's going to produce.
That all has to make sense.
Have the
that would be where the comparables that you'd look at. even commercial, you look at the income stream on it, but you also look at a location or maybe some kind of a value add situation where you could build next to it, or maybe there's this part that of the building that you can add an extra unit or some space that's rentable. So it's all about the money, I think, for the most part, with commercial and pricing it.
Yeah.
There's no heart in it.
Well, I think, one of the things that we talked about a lot when we were talking about residential, especially when we were talking about stage and everything, right? It's all about the emotions. Your emotions are what really kind of drive the buyer in a residential. Where on commercial, it's really just about the numbers. They kind of take the emotion out of it. And when you talk about businesses, and that's what commercial really is it's a business. So when you're talking about the businesses, they take the emotion out of it, and it's really all about the numbers. What is the income, the gross income? What are going to be the expenses? And that's how you get to the net income. And then basically, if I'm investing my money into something, I'm expecting a return on that investment. And that's kind of what we're saying that the cap rate is. So if I'm going to buy a commercial property, it's really not about the emotions of living in there and calling it my own and being home, right? It's more about, okay, this is a business. It's about the numbers. What is going to be my rate of return on my investment? And that's basically would determine what the value is from there.
Right. It's primarily about the income, and it's, I guess it is more pragmatic than residential, but there's still emotions with people. I mean, people like to drive their friends.
Oh, and commercial?
Yeah, because it's still, you're dealing with people. The people part doesn't really change. They're more pragmatic than you would be as, getting excited about a kitchen in a house probably. But people still like to own properties that they like, that they can be proud of, and that there's, more than just the money. I mean, it's primarily the money, but I do think there's a little more than that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when you think about commercial, it's businesses. You're talking about somebody that started a business, and whether it's being clothes that they designed, or a restaurant where they've, created a menu and food that people like, or whether it's, a service that's provided, you still put your personality into that, right?
Right.
So I can see where the emotions would kind of tail. But, I've always been told when it comes to investments that you need to take the emotion out of it, because it's about the numbers, and you need to make decisions based on the numbers, which is a little different, I think, than
Well,
that's true, especially when you're buying a building,
Yeah,
that's the primary thing that people would make their decisions based on. But I still think there's an element of emotion in there with a lot of people.
Yeah. So as far as when we talk about the residential real estate and what's available out there, on the commercial end, it's more about you said the different types. So I know another one we see around here is even agriculture, farming. So that's even a business, right? So that can even be
I've never dealt with
a commercial. So yeah.
Well,
so
I got some questions about that, because what are you purchasing? Land?
Well, specifically around here, it's the stables. It's the horses, or it might might even have some equipment in there in order to farm the fields and things like that. So the barns and the buildings and things. And one of the things that I know we've had to deal with here on the residential is, can you buy a farm where you live in that property, but yet it's a working farm, so your income is from the farm? So is that a business, or is that residential? So
that's you know what? I just sold one like that. I just sold a property like that. So he purchased, I think it was 30 plus acres. And there was a structure on there. So previously, the land was being rented out by the previous owners to somebody that was farming the land. So that was residential. I don't think, I mean, when we purchased it, when my buyer purchased it, he purchased it as residential.
Yeah. Well, some of the things that we have to be careful of here when we're looking at residential is we'll get an appraisal in, and there'll be a big, I'm going to say like a, and now I'm trying to think of the word, and the farm where they grow the plants,
like
or whatever. the barns
Oh,
or
like
what do you
greenhouse.
Greenhouse, thank you.
Greenhouse. Yeah.
We had one of them that had like 5 greenhouses side by side on it. And so the thought process is this a working farm or is this a residential?
Oh,
so
my
we had to
goodness.
prove, what kind of, because if we're dealing with residential, we're going to look at things like that, right?
What
And
were
is
they
it normal, typical
growing?
for their right? But yeah, so that's some of the things that we have to look at on the residential end. Now, there are some loan programs, that would be okay with that as long as there's a residential property, a residential home on the property. VA, a lot of times you can get away with that, and some other ones, but yeah, you do have to kind of be careful. Is this residential or is this commercial? Because it's a difference in financing. Definitely.
Do you finance commercial properties?
We do not do commercial property. No,
Okay.
I only do the residential. So 4 units, so we can do, rental income that way. But other than that, then no, we really don't do commercial. I know commercial loans and commercial lenders. It's a little bit different as far as qualifying goes, right? So they are looking at the borrower, like you said. Do they have a history of doing this? What's the likelihood that they're going to continue and be able to run a business successfully where it's going to make a profit enough to pay back the loan, right? So you're always going to look at those aspects. But, I think the biggest thing that the commercial lenders that I'm hearing is that they're really looking at what is the profit of the company that would be willing to pay back the loan. Yeah, for sure.
So how long, do either one of you know, how long is a commercial loan?
Well, usually
Some
they
of them
do,
are short as 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 30.
Yeah, usually they do like a 25-year amortization, but they have a call in 5 years. And most of the time,
Yes.
you just rework you do a note adjustment on the call. But there have been times when they want their money back, and during the last downturn, that happened a lot with people, and people couldn't pay. It was a hard time.
Oh, wow. So there is a call meaning like a balloon payment? Is that
Exactly? Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So
Okay. All right.
they hardly ever have a really long term, and they'll have a long amortization period, but they relook at things in typically 5 years.
But based on the economy or based on the way that,
Based on a lot of factors. It'd be based on the person that borrowed the money and also how the building's performing. So if you had a building that was 100% leased and it was making good income, that would be the best situation. If you had a building that had a high vacancy rate and maybe your own personal income had come down, then you'd probably have a tough time redoing the note. Or they'd probably want a lot of money for sure if they redid it.
So they kind of go back, and unlike residential, they go back and revisit how this is going. You say you're going to do this, you say you're going to do that, you purchased it because of this, but then they kind of revisit,
That's exactly
down the
right.
road to see isn't that something?
Yeah, once you have the loan, it's usually only good for 5 years, and then you have to take another look at it and rework it. So when things aren't good,
that's a lot different than residential that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you imagine that if they did that in residential?
No,
Well,
that'd be a nightmare.
I did do some research for a class.
It would be.
And when you think about real estate back before the Great Depression, a lot of the agriculture was for people's primary house, right? They lived there, but they also farmed it. But a lot of those had those call notes on it. And if the bank needed the money, they could call the notes at any time. So when
There's
they have
no
a run on the
way.
banking systems, they called all those notes, and that's why people had to pay the money back. And that's why we had a lot of changes in regulations on these residential mortgages after the Great Depression. During that time too.
So in
we've learned a lot from that.
residential, you close on a
Can you
house and things change. I mean, you might get a different job, you might lose a job, you're trying to recover during the time. And if they revisited that every few years, we would be in trouble. But that's interesting that they do it in commercial.
Yeah.
You know, they do, because again, things change. Who would even imagine that the pandemic happened? I mean, we couldn't predict that.
Or the fact that people would like no longer go into the office anymore. I mean, that really changed not commercial real estate, but how we work in an office, right?
Well, it really changed commercial real estate.
Yeah.
Because people don't go to an office as much as they once did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to wait and see how that turns out. There might be a lot of redevelopment around it, where they're reworking buildings or even tearing them down and starting over.
Yeah. Well, we've got such a housing shortage. Who knows? Maybe they'll take some of those commercial properties and turn them into residential.
I had heard one of the malls in Virginia Beach was thinking about doing that. Yeah. So I'd mentioned, Don, earlier when we were talking that, you know, the pandemic happened, people were working from home, but I would see them building commercial real estate. And I was like, you know, I couldn't understand that.
Well, those projects were probably already underway or at least permitted. So, you know, once you get started, it's hard to stop. So that's probably the reason.
I think people. Yeah, I think people forget how long it takes to get a property off the ground.
And how long does that take?
Well,
it takes years just to get a permit, usually, for a big building.
Wow, years.
Yeah.
So were there a lot of scared people out there? Were there scared people out there? I mean, the pandemic happened, you know, everybody's sitting at home. I was one of the guilty parties, sitting on my couch watching movies and eating popcorn, you know, and then you've got this note that you've got to build. You said it takes years, right? Do you just hope that, you know, things will still move forward?
Developing's always a risk. I mean, you make a bunch of projections based on what you know at that time, and then it becomes reality 2 or 3 or 5 years down the road, and things can be either way better or way worse. And recently, they've not been as good, you know, because of primarily the pandemic, I think, and then raising the interest rates on the heels of that. That was tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that we were behind on building and supplies and materials and things like that during
and they
the
were so
pandemic,
expensive.
Which takes the cost of our project. So in other words, with the commercial real estate, there is a huge risk, especially in development, of that, you know, because of that time delay, you know. And I know that even on the residential end, when we had the last, you know, housing crash there, you know, that was one of the things that they said too, that the builders had taken years to build these developments and houses in the, you know, higher price range, and then when the market crashed, they couldn't sell the houses. So
during the pandemic, labor and materials were up too. So, you know, if you made your projections to build at, you know, just to pick a number, say $300 a foot, it might end up being $350. So that could be a big game changer. And it was, you know, it really was. Time wise too, everything was slow.
Take up your profit.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's, you know, it really is, when you look at the history, a lot of this too is really in cycles. So it's amazing to kind of see all these cycles. But when you're talking about big developments and time delays and things like that, those are the things that you have to take into consideration. So commercial, from what I'm gathering, is just a little bit riskier because it's usually larger projects, right? So the risk is a bit higher in the beginning.
I think it's absolutely higher than I think the lowest is building single family residential. The bigger buildings, and as we're finding out now, the office space, because we didn't know this was going to change. I mean, I don't own any big buildings, but it's got to be tough on these people that do own them.
Yeah.
To keep them full, right? Because business changed.
They're not even close to full. A lot of them, they're empty.
Wow.
Yeah, there's going to be some banking problems because of it too. You know, 'cause
down the road. Still yet?
They won't be able to service the debt.
Wow.
So, you know, we'll see it in the banking industry too.
So commercial real estate, you're saying, is lagging right now, right? Is it because of the pandemic, or was it projected, you know, at one point? Or
I think it's
Still, after
primarily
all of
because-
these years.
Well, it hasn't been that long.
Yeah.
And the
19,
change
20,
in
22,
people work, how they
25
work
years.
after the pandemic, that's really the big thing. People aren't going to offices. So that's why that part of commercial real estate is
They realize
being
that with
pulled.
all the technology, with all the technology that's come aboard, people can work from home just as easily as they could in the office. I still think we miss a little bit sometimes, right?
Well, the
With
social-
and
the social aspect.
Yeah. So I am starting to see more of a trend where more people are starting to want to go into the office and
Yes.
be part of the team and kind of get some ideas and things like that. So I'm starting to see some of that come back. But I mean, when it comes to investing, it's all about reinvesting yourself all the time. So it's really just kind of taking a look at the economy, where it's at, where the need is, where the service is at, and making the best of what you have in that time frame. So, I mean, commercial real estate to me is exciting because it is an opportunity. And anytime that you can get into a business and really, make a rate of return on your investment, and that's where some of, a lot of the wealth is created from real estate, right? Residential and commercial.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it's definitely a positive thing. But what I'm hearing is you just have to think about all the risks that can happen before you get into it. But yet you don't want that to stop you. You just want to make sure that you're really looking at the numbers and the risk factors and really knowing what you're getting into. Like, does your loan have a 5-year call? I mean, in residential real estate, that would be a really scary thing. People are still afraid of the adjustable rate mortgages based on that, right? But yeah, so you just have to kind of know what you're getting into, right? So.
Well, there's absolutely risk in investing in real estate or developing real estate. I mean, it's not just an upside. And there's so many unknowns that can happen. I mean, the pandemic, we keep talking about that, but that's been the big thing lately, coupled with the interest rates. And, I don't know anybody that knew that was going to happen 10 years ago.
Right.
Oh gosh, no.
Yeah.
So what other unknowns are out there? Since we're
Technically everything.
what other ones?
I like to look at opportunities, though, right?
Right.
So what other opportunities are there out there? So if say the office buildings where people go to work is not as profitable as it used to be, what are some of the other commercial real estate that could be profitable? I mean, obviously, the housing shortage. I'm sure rental is really good for housing, right? So that would be
Right.
something that might be doing well. I know rents have really increased over the time frame. So for residential, for like apartment buildings or things like that.
I think there's always opportunity. I've done this for almost 40 years, and I don't think that'll ever go away. You just have to being patient and not forcing things is pretty important. And there's a lot of investors sitting on the sidelines now that have cash that they'll probably come back in when they feel like the trend's going in a direction they like. The investment buyers that rely on borrowing money, which is most of them, I think they'll probably sit it out a little bit longer. But if you're a cash buyer, there's some good opportunities right now because you can buy a property at a 7 cap where it might have been 5 or below a few years ago. So if you have all cash, things are actually looking pretty good. If you have tenants coupled with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because you see, I see these buildings in Virginia that, they turn over, and then you think, are you going to, you're buying it because it's vacant. Then they buy it, and then it's vacant. And then they sell it, and then somebody else comes along and buys it, and it's vacant. So what's the change that needs to happen to make it successful? I don't know the answer to that.
You need tenants. You need income off of the property to make it valuable. So if you buy in vacant buildings and you can't fill them, you're not going to change the value. It's still going to be whatever it is, pretty much. So
But it's interesting to see the turnover.
Yeah, I've never seen anything quite like that, but it's all based on the income is what creates the value.
Yeah. So, and that's of course if we're looking at the commercial buildings, you're renting it out, and then you have, like you said, like the restaurants and things like that. And so, do these people who own the restaurants, are they just renting these buildings, or are they owning these buildings?
That's
kind
a
of
good-
different
could
there
be
too,
either.
because a lot of people think that it could be either one. But I think a lot of people think that they own the restaurant, that they must own the building, where a lot of times it's
rent both ways.
The rent that
Most
the
people-
owner of the building
yeah.
is making profit from the rent, and not necessarily from
Yeah,
the business itself.
most small businesses rent. There aren't many that. It's a small percentage that actually own the building too. I mean, it's great if you're a small business and you can be buying the building, because then you've got something to sell later on, or you can become the landlord.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the mixed use, because we're starting to see, like you said, Darlene, we're starting to see a lot of that popping up. So are they renting the commercial on the bottom and the residential on the top, or can they sell the residential on the top and rent the commercial on the bottom, or how does that work?
I guess
You could
just
sell it if
depends
you
on how it's
condominiumized it.
set up.
So, yeah, if you condominiumized any building, you could sell a portion of it. So sometimes most of the time that a single owner in the building, he just rents all the space. So whether the income is whether income was coming off of an office space or residential or retail, it's all kind of tossed in the same pot as far as how you would look at the value of the building.
So that sounds like that would be a good investment. I mean, think about it. I mean, you have 6, 7, condos on the top that you're renting, homes, and then you have restaurants or bar or coffee shop on the bottom. I say we all go in and do one of those.
Yeah, we definitely starting to see more and more of those, I think, around, and I think that people are wanting to live around the community in which they
Right.
The walkability is pretty important in Seattle.
Yeah.
For any of the residential units, the walk score, or how close it is to things, is really important to most people, because they don't want to use their car. And a lot of people don't
Seattle.
have cars.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I don't know how it's like where you are, but there's a lot of people, young people, that they don't have cars. They use Uber or Lyft.
Yeah.
So like to get to work?
Yeah.
Are they working from home or?
Well, a lot of them work from home or
Like
coffee
safety.
shops.
Huh.
They they view the world differently than we did. I mean, they don't have books or albums or things that older people might have. Most of the stuff.
What is that?
Most of their stuff's on their phone or their computer, so they don't need as much space.
I was gonna say, nowadays you got all your CDs you want right here.
Right there. Isn't that something? Yeah, they sold us the pipe dream back then, didn't they?
We had to buy all the.
That's just
Yeah, we had to
different
buy
times.
it all.
Yeah.
Different
And I'm
times.
sure we'll see things changing. It's just I know one of the things that they talk about in appraisals is highest and best use of property.
Right.
Right.
So, when you're looking at property, what is its highest and best use? And that's basically determined by what's going on in the area around that particular property. And,
Yeah.
and are you, using it
It'll
for
be interesting
the
to
best
see
that
what
it can be
happens in
used
the
for?
future. I mean, I think a
Yeah.
lot of the
How it
suburbs,
goes.
a lot of suburbs might see some redevelopment because they're, half an hour away from where people work. So either put more commercial out in that area, or people are going to come into town, and who knows what'll happen with those great big houses in the suburbs.
Oh, I know. I know.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you hear more and more, people that are actually working from home. We have the people that have their primary property, and then they'd have a second home, like on the beach, towards the beaches or
Yeah.
resort areas. That a lot of these people, now that they can work from home, they're just selling their primary homes and living in their moving
Really?
into the second home. So, like, if I'm going to work from
Yeah.
home, why don't I just work from the beach, right? Or I might just
Right.
work
I've got a
from-
couple of friends that
Yeah.
have done that.
Yeah. So it's like now, a lot of times your residential home was around your job, so you could commute, and now if they're working from home, it doesn't matter where you live, so you can live in your resort area.
Yeah.
Why only go for vacation? So that's a trend that we're kind of seeing a little bit more and more, where people are actually just moving in the vacation home instead of.
Don't get any ideas,
Yeah.
you guys. Especially you, Darlene.
I know. It's so quiet. But yeah, so I think we'll see changes, but been doing this for 30 plus years, right? So I've definitely seen a lot of changes, along the way, but and I think they really just kind of go, it's being able to see those opportunities and take advantage of the opportunities when they first approach themselves, and being able to understand and ask all the questions and know what the differences are, right? So, you don't want the risk to scare you away, but you want the risk to be brought to the table and talked about,
Right.
so that you can make good decisions and good choices. Because that's one of the things that we always say, right, Crystal? We give you the options, and you
make the decision.
choices.
Yeah.
You make the decisions, right?
What do you see
Based on
happening
what's
with
best for
interest
you.
rates, Darlene?
I wish I had a crystal ball. To me, it's a little bit different, because I did start in this world where we started out with interest rates at 13%. And we thought 13% was really good because they came down from 18.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I'm definitely showing my age and how long I've been in the business. But to me, 6 and 7% interest rate for residential is an average over the last 30 years. I mean, I can
Absolutely.
remember seeing 6% interest rate and thinking, oh my gosh, I've never seen interest rates this low. This is incredible. There's no way it's going to go any lower. In fact, if you take a look at that last housing bubble, one of the things that they said is that a lot of those pay option arms and different loan programs, they were so fear-based that the people weren't going to be able to afford the payments, because they just knew interest rates were going to go up after 6%.
Right.
They were down to 6%, and they just knew that those interest rates were going to go up on those arms, and that people wouldn't be able to afford those homes. Well, the interest rates never went up. They went down, but they still, kind of got afraid of those programs anyway. But then, so do I think they'll get down to the 3s and the 2s? No, I don't.
I can't imagine that.
That's really, I think, when we were artificially buying mortgage bonds to keep the interest rates low,
Yeah.
and say Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. But so do I think it'll get that low? No.
Yeah.
Do I think they'll stable out? Yeah, I think they'll stable out. I think what we've seen now more than I've seen in the past is the how fast they move up and down. Normally it's a small little change here and there as mortgage bonds change, but sometimes I can see a huge, 50%, 50 basis points, discount points adjust in a day, which is crazy. So that's a large movement. They're very volatile.
What are you
right
seeing
now.
residential rates at right now?
Depending on the type of loans, but yeah, I mean we're in the high sixes probably.
High sixes,
And,
okay.
on the
that's
normal
pretty good, if you
conventional
ask
loans,
me. That's good.
And again, over the
Yeah.
average of the last 30 years, yes. Now, if you had somebody that had a 2 or 3% interest
Oh,
rate,
well, yeah.
So some of the things that we may see a little bit different now than we hadn't seen in the past is maybe some of those VA and FHA loans that are assumable, where people are selling those houses that have those 2 and 3 and 4% interest rates on them. I think we'll definitely see a lot more of that in the near future. But so I wish I had a crystal ball. I've learned not to even.
Yeah.
That's funny. I just had that
to
question this
look
morning
at rates. So
from an agent.
yeah, I've sold houses at 13%. I've sold houses at 8%, like it was nothing. I've sold houses, 7%. So it's not really the interest rate. I think it's what you're used to, and it's that affordability factor, right? So it's what is your income versus what you have to pay on for your housing. So.
What you just said, I think, is true. I mean, a lot of the people, younger people, what they're used to, they've got this little snapshot of between 3.5 and 4.5, and look at 30 years. That's only
Let it go, people. Let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just what you've gotten used to and what your normal is. That's kind of like, Crystal, we were talking about that too when we talked about, sellers that were paying, when I first got in the business 30 years ago, sellers were paying all closing costs, everything, doing whatever it took, because it was taking 6 months to sell a house, right? So sellers were paying everything. And then in today's world, you got 6 days to sell a house instead of 6 months.
Yeah.
And, but you're not having sellers, pay that. So if a buyer was used to a seller paying all that, and you try to tell them in today's world, you can ask, but what are the chances?
Well, things have
that
changed.
you're going to get a seller. Yeah, they're starting to. We're starting to see some changes now too. So yeah, it's really just about knowing the market, and knowing what you can do, and that things do change, and you have to look at whatever that new normal is, right? So whether it's residential or commercial or whatever that might be, it's just really kind of keeping your eyes open and seeing what the new normal is and what the risks are versus your benefits, because that's why people invest, right?
Well, it'll be interesting next year with, the election has passed, which we've had that discussion, how it's going to change. How is it's going to, we've got a lot of new changes in real estate, which we've had the podcast on. We have, change in the economy, change on how business is done, change on how homes are purchased. So, and we're moving into a new year. So it's going to be interesting how all of that meshes together,
And really, I think it's just, if anything else, the economy is really based on confidence. So I think the more confidence people have, the better that will be. So,
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Look at the bright sides.
I think people's perception of how things are has more to do with what they're going to do than whatever the facts are. If they think it's going to be good, they'll bet on it.
Yeah, and they'll follow through, right? And if they're afraid, then they sit on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So I think fear holds everybody back.
I have a list of people that are still on the sidelines, waiting for that 2% to come back.
They're going to be really old.
Definitely.
And look at the opportunities they could be missing.
Yeah, I know.
Right. So look at all the
opportunities they've missed. I mean, we have those conversations.
So I don't know. I'm a big believer in real estate, commercial or residential. That it's, as long as you are educating yourself on the facts and the risks and the benefits, that it's just always a good time to buy, right?
It always
is a good time to buy.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been great, guys.
Can you believe it?
Learned a little bit.
We got through it.
Well, thanks.
Another podcast. Thank you, Don, for joining us and taking us out on the commercial end. We really appreciate it.
I hope you guys have a great new year.
Definitely. Thank you too.
You too. And Merry Christmas.
Take care.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Coffee and Keys is brought to you by Darlene Kemp, VP, Senior Loan Officer, NMLS ID 173897. Atlantic Coast Mortgage, LLC is an equal housing lender. NMLS ID 643114. www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. And Crystal Jacques, Realtor for both RE/MAX Allegiance, 4000 Virginia Beach Boulevard, Suite 164, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452. Office phone 757-490-7300. And RE/MAX Professionals, 20,241 North 67th Avenue, Suite A1 Glendale, Arizona 85308. Office phone 623-362-3000. Each office is independently owned and operated and supports the Fair Housing Act and Equal Opportunity Housing.